I'm so honored to be here, to have been invited, particularly because this is the first of what I hope will be a long and fruitful journey in terms of talks and gatherings and meaningful exchange between all aspects of your community. I was asked for a title for the talk, and I really wanted to focus on leadership and how our communities, all of our communities, have to heal the divisions that are historic and contemporary for the sake of our nation and for the sake of our future as a country. So that is the theme of my conversation with you this morning, and I'm hoping it will be a conversation. I'll share my insights, but then I'll stop and open it up for an opportunity to hear from you and to respond to your questions or comments. Now, we should have tested this, but we didn't, so I'm going to see if I walk away. Okay, good. I want to say, first of all, that Alabama was very important to the shaping of my consciousness. Now, Max indicated that my mother was from Alabama. She was one of 14 children born in Pollard, Alabama. And it was during World War II that she made her way from Alabama up to Ohio. So I was about 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old, when she decided that my brother and I should come to Alabama and we should visit our grandparents. We should learn about her home. And so at that point, you know, they would put us on the train and we would be taken care of, you know, by the porters. And so we had our boxes of chicken and other things, and we headed down to Alabama. So we kept asking, are we there yet? You know, my kids are we there yet? You know, we were so excited. And so finally, the gentleman came over to us and he took us over to the window, the biggest window, and he said, you see that little house back there? And we said, yes. He said, that was Pollard. Needless to say, we were a little disappointed. It turned out that was the country store. And everything you could possibly want, we could get in that store. Everything from ice cream to thread, right? And if Mr. Bob didn't have it, he would order it. Now, I was growing up in Cleveland at the time, so this was a little bit of a different cultural experience for me. But what was most indelibly impressed into my consciousness was what we call Jim Crow segregation. I had never seen signs that said white only. And my grandparents were so determined that we not violate the rules of the culture that the enthusiasm with which they grabbed us and said, no, you can't do this and you can't do that, it was really shocking. During that summer, I became ill, and my family refused to take me to get help. And so I languished for weeks, and I don't know how dangerous that illness was, but I can assure, finally, my uncle, bless his heart, he said, take that girl to the doctor, no matter what. And I remember them taking me to the hospital and taking me in the colored-only entrance. And shortly after that, I was sent back to Ohio. But that memory of that colored-only entrance of Jim Crow, I was only 7 or 8 years old, but it stayed with me forever. And when they put us on the train and said, y'all come back now, I remember saying to my relatives at the time, I will never, as long as I have life, come back. So coming back here, being invited to is a very special day for me as well. But there is one aspect of my experience that also is humorous when I was here. You know, and it helped me to understand a different way of relating to community and family. They kept introducing me to people, all of us, right? And they'd say, Gail, this is Cousin Louise, and this is Cousin Carrie, and this is Cousin Alice, and this is Cousin Mabel. And, you know, at 7 years old, I was meeting everybody, and I was very happy. So close to the time to leave, I said, you know, I am confused. I have one question to ask you. And they said, what's the question? And I said, why does everybody have the same first name? He said, what do you mean? I said, oh, those are your cousins. I have lots of cousins. They've been around Birmingham and Carole and other places. It's been a real privilege for me for the last almost 8 years to work at the Kellogg Foundation. I made the decision to join the foundation because they, as a board, had made a commitment to being the most effective anti-racist organization they could be, to promoting racial equity. And I had spent my entire life working on those issues in my way up to that point. And I said, if the 5th largest philanthropy in the world is willing to be straightforward and make that assertion and that commitment, I want to be at that team. So I was fortunate to have been invited and to have been engaged as an architect of our efforts. And I want to share with you some of the lessons that we're learning. Now, I was hired to be vice president for health. My intention was to focus on the racial equity piece because I saw them as intimately related. At one point, the suggestion was, let's take the racial equity work and separate it from the health work. And I said no. Because these issues are life and death issues. These issues are about the health and well-being of our children, of our families, of our communities, and of our nation. And they need to be connected in our minds as well as in our actions. Because our grounding in terms of our health unit is on the social determinants of health and well-being. And so exposure to the consequences of the belief in a hierarchy of human value, the consequences of racism, they have tremendous health impact on our well-being. Now, we all have to have heroes and heroes. Sometimes our egos might get in the way and we think, you know, that we are doing all this ourselves. But ultimately, we are really usually following in the footsteps of great leaders, many unsung heroes. But one of the people that has been a tremendous inspiration to me because of his spirit, because of his power, is Nelson Mandela. The fact that he could go through so many phases in his own life and live long enough to lead his country was just an amazing inspiration to me. And I'd like to share a few words from him that are from a wonderful new book that I highly recommend, which is called Conversations with Myself by Nelson Mandela. Because he was so introspective and so thoughtful. This is from a letter he'd written to Winnie Mandela, his wife. And he wrote this letter from his prison cell. And he says, honesty, sincerity, simplicity, humility, pure generosity, absence of vanity, readiness to serve others, qualities which are within easy reach of every soul, are the foundation of one's spiritual life. When I read those words, I thought they're also the foundation of a community's spiritual life. Because a community has a spiritual life. It has a responsibility to care and to demonstrate love. And deep introspection is required by communities. When we decided we would be bold enough to take on this issue of racial equity and racial healing, there was a lot of fear and trepidation that we would alienate, that people would not come to the table. I was even advised personally that my career would be damaged because I'd be identified with this kind of assertive and aggressive work, and I wouldn't have opportunities for employment if I ever left the foundation, and on and on and on. But this work of coming to terms with our racialized past and moving beyond denial of its footprint in our lives today. While there may be anger associated with the oppression, the work itself is healing work, and it need not alienate. It need not be wrapped in a frame that pushes people away. It can be wrapped in a frame that pulls people in. Now, there's something about the human psyche that wants to deny the ugly. This was the anniversary of Tiananmen Square in China. And you know, the government went to great lengths to deny what happened here. And there was an interview of a young man who was compelled to draw pictures of what he saw because he was there. His consciousness would not let him not express what he saw. And as a result, he was in danger of being in prison because he dared tell the truth. This idea of individual and collective amnesia about the past, this issue of denial, it is human to do it. But it doesn't really serve us. And so the work of optimizing our health and well-being, of closing the opportunity gaps and the achievement gaps, part of that work is coming to terms with our real history. Without blame, without shame, without guilt, but with honesty and sincerity, to use the words of Nelson Mandela. So what does that mean? That means that we have to change our individual and our collective narratives about what is the underlying cause, what are the underlying dynamics of what we see. Changing the narrative helps us to find the right solutions. I'm going to pick a couple of examples to share with you. One of them is the issue of school discipline. This idea that our children are forced out of school, are pushed out of school, are harshly punished for adolescent behaviors, and are seen as the problem. This is a movement now in this country to change this harsh discipline paradigm, if you will. But that movement has been a long time coming. And it's connected to a cultural ethos that emerged in the 80s that was filled with what we call code language to label our children of color as the problem. And it was so pervasive that many classroom teachers didn't even know they had embodied it. I remember taking my daughter going to a parent-teacher conference in Illinois. I'd moved to the suburbs so she'd have better education possibilities. So I get to the parent-teacher conference, and the teacher is looking down. She doesn't make eye contact with me. She's looking at my daughter's work, and she says, Heather's not a problem in math. She's not a problem in social studies. She's not a problem in it. You know she is not a problem. Well, needless to say, my wrath emerged. And I explained to that teacher, well, let's just say we had a conversation. And ironically, that teacher became my daughter's advocate after that. And actually stayed in her life for the next 10 years, writing her letters as she went on. That teacher's eyes were open to her own biases at that moment. And fortunately, I was there to stand up for my daughter. So changing the narrative, understanding the subliminal and the programming that goes on that is so pervasive, is part of the work of racial healing. When we change the narrative, we tell different stories. And we don't ignore the past. But the places in this country that have actually reduced suspensions and expulsions and challenged the harsh disciplinary practices, those places, those movements have been led by the students and the parents. There is a place for advocacy and standing up against policies that are wrong. And the only way a democracy works is if we keep working at it. We are such a young democracy. And for most of our life as a country, we believed in a false hierarchy of human value. Most of the centuries of this nation, that belief was embedded. And so this 21st century allows us to face that reality, to face its consequences. You know, denial has layers. I like to start with the first thing we deny is we deny the facts, especially if it's painful. I jokingly talk about gaining weight, right? And so when I first started to gain weight, I used to go out and buy dresses that cut different. Same size, but different cut. Right? Then the second layer of denial, if we will face the facts, is often the denial of the consequences of those facts. My dad was a smoker, and he denied that there would be any consequences. When we tried to get Dad to stop smoking, he would say, "I'm going to die of something." You know? He did actually die of lung cancer. If we face the consequences, then we have to face the implications. And that's usually where we get stuck, because the implications are so far-reaching. If we face the fact that we have criminalized our young people, particularly our young men, then we have to face what that has done to them. Some of the achievement gaps, some of the excess expulsions, the pathway to prisons, those are all consequences of this framing, if you will, this criminalization of our young men and women, our children. The implications of that will stop us dead in our tracks, because that means we have to change. We have to change the policies. We have to change the practices. We have to change the laws. We have to change the enforcement. We have to change the expectations. We have to change the tracking. We have so much to change. And then once we face the implications, then we really get to the hard part, which would be the feelings. The irony about feelings is that feelings either motivate us or they paralyze us. And all too often when it comes to equity issues, the feelings paralyze us and we don't act. But I'm here to tell you that after about 15 years of hard work within local communities around this country, there have been some real victories. There is a movement to stop pushing kids out of school, primarily kids of color. And there is support from the federal government with brand new guidelines from the Office of Education and Justice and Civil Rights. Guidelines to which we have to hold our communities accountable. Now, I haven't read the latest reports. Largest Rotary Club in the world, not just in America, in the world. So that was a challenge, to deliver my message to this group and have it received. Well, to show you that things are not always so black and white, my first scholarship to college, back in what, the 60s, was a Rotary Club scholarship. So moving this needle forward requires being able to see and embrace the value in all groups and bring allies to the work and get past our assumptions. And so I talked to that group for an hour, and their theme song, they play music, you know, for every meeting, and their theme song for this meeting, to give you a sense of the age distribution of the room, was, will you still love me when I'm 64? You familiar with that? So you get a sense of the demographic of that room. But after my talk with them, they gave me a standing ovation, and they came up to sign up to be part of this work of racial healing. But you had a leading institution in that city, the YWCA, And you have them have sense enough to reach out to find new allies, to make sure that everybody in that city is committed to the work. And you have to do that too. This room should be filled with twice as many people next time. And the only way that's going to happen is if each of you make a commitment to bring 5 more allies. And those allies may not look like you, and that's good. Because you have to leverage power. I want to talk a little bit about this business of racial healing at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and some of what we learned. We sent out a request for proposals, and this was after we had scanned the existing work in the field. And we knew there were about 300 programs out there. We were building on past efforts, and so we thought if we got 500 applications, we'd be doing pretty well. We received about 1,000 applications within a 3-week window, and they represented every state in this country, with the exception of Wyoming. Now, but we funded in Wyoming. But it was really amazing to sort of get your finger on the pulse of the fact that America wants to heal. And that was before the events of the last few years. That was before Michael Brown. That was before Trayvon. That was before the Zimmerman. America said yes to our request to do the work. And I would suggest to you that the issues of health equity and health disparities are symptoms of a much, much deeper challenge that we as a country have to address. We're very proud to be part of President Obama's initiative on boys and men of color. Once again, that initiative came about because the field had been working for decades to draw attention to this work. And when that moment came that the president spoke after that verdict, some of the leaders came to him and said, this is the data, this is the evidence, we need to do something. But we have said that the issues facing black men and boys of color in this country, black and brown and Native American and Asian American, that those issues are symptoms of a much deeper conversation, a much deeper challenge. The challenge is that while we think America was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all are created, America was conceived in the fallacy of a belief in racial hierarchy. Now, that's a hard thing to come to grips with. And the books that are really telling that story are just starting to come out. But even the colonies, the original colonies, stood up for their freedom when the thought that they could still own slaves was threatened. So even the forming of our union was rooted in the need to protect the right to own slaves. Because the belief was that there was a hierarchy of value in humanity. Where did that belief come from? You know, when I first, as a very young person, saw the manifestations of that belief, my cousin, who was like a sister to me, was shot point blank in the chest and killed. And the man who shot her went off to the military the next day. And then there were other incidents that occurred, and as a young person, I had a certain naivete, as I expressed to you earlier. I didn't even know what cutting meant, right? And so I couldn't understand, why do people behave this way? Why are people so cruel? And it wasn't until I understood that there was a fundamental paradigm, a fundamental belief that was undergirded by science of the time, that it was okay. Because there was a difference in value. That belief came from the 1700s. And in the 21st century, we have to jettison that belief. That's part of our work in this century. And once you get past that this is we once thought the earth was flat. Okay? And when we thought that, navigation was constricted. Because people thought they'd fall off the edge. So we once thought that there was a hierarchy of human value. And we built our societies based on that. And we made our power structures and power gradients based on that. And now it's time to realize, boy, we're reaching. When I say we, I mean all of us. And find ways to celebrate our collective humanity. And that's really what this work is about. It's about celebrating who we are. And being able to look one another in the eye and see our humanity. But because it's been so embedded, it's become unconscious. And some of the work that we've been able to fund at the Kellogg Foundation as part of our initiative, I'm so very proud of, is this growing body of research about unconscious bias. Unconscious bias, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm an unconscious racist? No. It means that I'm a human being. And my brain works the way the human brain was wired to work. And so, that's a chair. I know it's a chair. I don't hesitate to call it a chair. Why? Because I have categorized that image, the back, the seat, the legs, and my brain automatically makes that a chair. And that's the way unconscious bias works. We have been bombarded with so many stereotypes in our culture, so many lies and untruths, so many images that are false, that we all have embedded in our consciousness biases that are automatic in our response. We don't even think about it. And that's the thing about unconscious bias. These are our automatic responses. Does that make us bad? That makes us human. There's a story of a judge who he took the unconscious bias course at Harvard, and he refused to believe that he made bias in his decisions. So he blinded himself in the sense that he took away the names and the pictures of all the cases that were coming to him. And he examined, and he found that indeed he had disproportionately harsh sentencing for those who were dark. He was really unhappy with himself when he discovered that. And he set about changing it. And so this idea of unconscious bias is alive and well. It's a gender bias as well. It's racial bias. It's ethnic bias. It is part of the air we breathe. It's kind of the soup of our country. And so we have to get creative about how to work on it and how to fix it. You can start by taking the implicit bias test online to discover your own biases. We are funding a brilliant young man who's working with police departments all over this country to help police understand the psychological motivations for their behaviors. The unique thing about this work is that the police departments have to call him. He doesn't go in and say, you know, I'm from the government and I'm here to fix you. It's a very different approach. And he's got over 50 police departments, police chiefs that have said, yes, we want to do this work. So that's exciting. But the work has to be done in the schools. It has to be done in the hospitals. It has to be done in the criminal justice system. We got lots of work to do, so we got to live a long time. We got to be healthy. Which brings me to the last things I want to share with you. You know, we love dichotomies. You know, it's either or. It's this work or it's that work. I'm trained as a holistic health provider, so for me it's always all of the above, right? It's this holistic, integrated approach. But the lesson I try to leave, especially with people like yourselves who are activists, many of you, is that we really don't have the luxury of either or. It's usually both and whenever you're in an argument and somebody's trying to create a dichotomy, step back from it and say, well, maybe not. Maybe it's not research or activism. Maybe it's research and activism. So I think, given that we're all carrying the legacy of the centuries of belief in hierarchy and devaluation of too much of our humanity, that we have to work on undoing that at the same time that we have to mitigate the consequences of it. We have to have things in our lives and in our communities, resources that help us cope with this legacy in a proactive way. So, you know, I used to be a holistic practitioner, and I had thousands of patients. And, you know, I would say you do have to make the right choices in terms of what you eat. And some of the younger, more activists would say, I don't have time for that. I got to make sure there are grocery stores in my community. Yeah, you do. We do have to have grocery stores that sell whole, fresh foods. But we also have to go the extra mile and be disciplined ourselves. And I spend too much of my life on an airplane, right? And if you wanted the second worst place in America to get healthy foods, is the airport. The first worst place in America for healthy foods? Anybody? Hospital. Really want to die. Last time I had major surgery, they kept bringing me all this stuff in a tray. And I said, do you think I could get an apple or a banana? And the woman looked at me and she said, I'm sorry, you don't have anything like that in this hospital. And so I called my doctor. I said, can you sign me out now? You know? But seriously, you have to go the extra mile. And so yesterday when I arrived, I hadn't eaten for most of the day because I had really tried to be disciplined as I was wandering through these airports, and I had been drinking water all day, you know? And so I was starving by the time I got here. We went to dinner, and I rather probably inappropriately said, look, I'm really hungry for you. But we have to mitigate this extra stress that we're embracing, this allostatic load. And we know there's enough known about nutrition now to help us do that. We know that hydration is critically important, and not sugar-sweetened beverages, not caffeinated beverages, water. We know that B vitamins and magnesium and particularly are important to our cells being able to produce the energy that we need for adaptation. We know that. So let's make sure that we're getting in enough and we're not taking in so much sugar that we're burdening our energy production cycles and mechanisms. We know that breathing is a basic part of good health, and that when we're stressed and uptight, we breathe in a more shallow way, and that's going to impact everything in our bodies. So we don't have to be foo-foo to meditate. We don't have to be California to take a few moments and sit down and do deep breathing and focus on the positive aspects of our experience. That's a health practice. It's not alligator. It's bringing ourselves into balance with ourselves. We have to do that. Our babies need mother's milk. It's not a choice, it's a fact. Nature provided the perfect nutrition for our infants. And if they get it exclusively for the first 6 months of life, they are protected against all manner of illness. It is just basic. And who does the least breastfeeding in this country? African Americans. It's crazy. Become an advocate for that for the infants. The data is there, it's clear. There's a process, there are practices, there are policies. We just have to take action. But guess what? Not only does it protect the baby, it protects the mother. The mother reduces her risk for heart disease, cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, even overweight. So these are simple things, but very important steps we have to take to mitigate this environment that we're dealing with that is rooted in denying our most fundamental human need. Because our most fundamental human need is relationships. We need to be connected to other human beings. We need love. And if I had to come up with a shorthand description for the founding centuries of this nation, I call it centuries of organized lovelessness. How many of you have seen 12 Years a Slave? I have not been able to bring myself to see it. I even bought a ticket so I could support it, but I can't go in. Because I'm a little too sensitive. But it was one of the first dramatizations, authentic dramatizations of what I'm describing as centuries of organized lovelessness. And he escaped. He wasn't born a slave. So imagine generations and generations and generations of the imposition of this level of denial of humanity. I didn't understand it when I came south back in 1958. I didn't understand colored and white only. To this day, I don't understand persistent residential segregation, which is the root of all the other disparities. But we, as human beings, all of us, know that this is wrong. And that's why it ended. That's why the abolition movement emerged. That's why there was an attempt to be fair and to reconcile with Native Americans and offer them treaties and land, because some people deep inside understood the absurdity of the imposition of the hierarchy. But we are very, very much in the early stages of reconciling that absurd history and that absurd legacy. So my charge to you is to stand up for what you know is right, to connect to others and broaden this circle of leadership, to have the courage to know that our responsibility while we're on this planet is to bring goodness and love to others, and to identify when something is very, very wrong, and to find our own voice in helping to make it right. I'm excited about what you have attempted to do here. I see in this room what I saw in Madison, which was the potential to turn things right side up and to share in the sense of pride that will come from that as Birmingham becomes a much more desirable, livable city, because there is much less inequity, and there is much more fairness, and there is much more expression of the voice of the people in bringing that about. And that's what community engagement is really about. Now you have lofty objectives around academic research and good citizenship and all of that. And I think you will accomplish all of that, but you will do so by prioritizing and I think having the courage to face the unique history of this city and overcome the divisions that are a consequence of the unique history of this city. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to interacting and hearing your questions and comments.
Open up the floor. Thank you so much, Dr. Christopher, for being here and for that presentation this morning. We're going to open up the floor to audience questions at this time. There are 2 mics that are on the floor. If you'll please go to the mic, state your name, tell us the organization that you're representing, and then pose your question to Dr. Christopher.
Hi, I'm Tina Burns-Giles with the Bethesda Life Center, and we are a clinic on the western side of Birmingham. For 25 years,
Is it working? Okay.
Yeah.
For 25 years, I've worked with race relations in the city, and we, through the Southern Poverty Law Center and the National Coalition Building Institute and the what used to be the National Conference for Christians and Jews and things of that nature, we still face denial that people are racist. And when you say racist, you really have to ask people kind of what they mean, because my very, very liberal friends who are from mothers of another, or that are from another mother, they will say, and even when you try to help them understand, okay, this is what I mean by racist, the unconscious bias of their reaction to someone's speech pattern, their reaction to the way someone may dress, the reaction, I went natural after I was vested in the state retirement system because of perception. But also, I don't feel that we've dealt with healing. I felt that we had a lot of dealing with other and how we're treated by other, but I don't, and it may have happened before I moved here, but I don't know where we have focused on healing in the way that South Africa has focused on healing as a community. And so the issues of internalized oppression, I find from working in the community that I work in, is just as destructive, and I'm not sure we have an answer and an approach to the internalized oppression issues.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all the work you've done, for as long as you've done it, and for having the courage to go back. When I was hired at the Kellogg Foundation, and they're in Michigan and I'm in Washington, D.C. at the time, and so I went back home to my community. And the first question people asked was, how did you wear your hair? The good news is there was no question at that point. The issue of healing needs to be defined and it needs to be understood. Healing is first and foremost a process, and the steps that I went through in terms of the denial paradigm of facing the facts and addressing the consequences, the implication, and ultimately the feelings. Feelings are very frightening. There are many methodologies that support the healing process. The jury's still out as to the impact of the Truth and Reconciliation work in South Africa. I've often said that in this country it's not about reconciliation because of the long lapse between what was the initial atrocities and now. And so I tend to focus more on healing, which has a lot to do with story. Being able to fully express and to diffuse the power of the experience in one's memory, and to find a way of making peace and moving on. It's work. It's the work of trauma recovery, it's the work of adversity, and you're absolutely right. We have not acknowledged the need for the work, and we have not created opportunities to do the work. I will say this, that people move beyond denial when they believe they have the resources to cope with the situation that they're denying. And so the collective engagement around these issues is one form of the resource, if you will, that's needed to cope. But it is hard work, and I would recommend that you visit our website. There are many groups that are working on the healing. And if you create a core nucleus of folks that are intentionally engaged in moving beyond denial and healing, you'll find that you free up energy for more purposeful and focused individual action, collective action. Yes, and I love your hat.
I'm Barbara Merchant. I'm about volunteer this morning, but I'm currently raising a 7-year-old.
Yes.
And I get to schools, and you was talking about discipline. I see in the younger parents, they're not disciplining kids. But my stand, I have a grandson, he was making sad faces, and I had to get the switch. And after I got on to him, he runs home every day, he has a smiling face. And I with your stand on, the discipline is, I still believe in the switch.
Okay.
I still believe it.
It is a major belief that is part of the African American experience. And a lot of people believe in it. The belt, the switch. I am a proponent of good parenting. And I believe that we have not done enough to teach, model, reinforce, support, and emphasize effective parenting. Now, I raised 2 children, and I never had to use corporal punishment. But sometimes they wish I had. Because I can look at them. Somebody said, give them the eye, and they knew how to behave. So discipline and parenting are not one and the same. Parenting involves the fundamental relationship that you establish with the child, the expectations for behavior, and the consequences when that behavior is not appropriate. I personally, and I got into a big fight on a TV interview once, and I was so angry because I had written my first book, which was about parenting, and the gentleman who was interviewing me told me that, you know, he was going to beat his child, and that was that, and I just looked at him, and I forgot I was on camera, and I said, how would you feel if I walked over and slapped you? That ended that conversation. I believe when we model violence for children, we teach them that that's the way to solve a problem, and they're also humiliated. That said, I am a firm disciplinarian, and I just expect and demand respect from children. I'm not in the negotiating space. You know, I once heard a good friend of mine was pleading with her daughter who's running a dehydration fever. Please drink some. I said, what? You know, I was thinking, who's the mother here? You know? So it is a very important issue. We need to send our children to school prepared to behave in manners that are appropriate. But we cannot allow them to be pushed into jail because they use the toilet. We just can't. So there's this, you know, it's never black and white, it's always gray. Prevention means effective parenting. Community engagement means making sure the resources are there in your community to make sure that children are parented well, so that they're not vulnerable to cruelty. Yes.
Take these last 2 questions.
Good morning. My name is Bertha Nellis with Birmingham Community Development Corporation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and parenting do work. It produced a major in the military and 2 master's degrees in my child, so it does work.
All right.
As y'all really so mean, I said, it's all right, I mean what I said. My point this morning, the point that you brought out, we need resources in our community for the right choice and funds to help improve the community. For the past 5 years, I have reached out to at least 30 families at Christmas, and I have to go by getting people to fund my program. I have submitted and received any, but I didn't let that stop me. I went out to companies and to individuals that I knew that would help me, and those children is grateful. And now we're getting ready to do a financial literacy program for the young women within the housing development. I feel these are the people that we need to reach. These are the ones that we need to teach how to be parents, how to be managers of your funds. So you won't have to depend on the government for everything. So my reaching out to you is, what major steps would I have to take in order to reach these young ladies, to get them on a better level of managing their finances, even getting job ready so they can take care of their children.
So I thank you very much, and I want to applaud the work that you do. That's actually where my work started many, many decades ago, was in families in public housing in Chicago. So I really respect and appreciate what you do. I heard 2 questions there, and I think the most important question that you asked was how to get the funding to support your work. And I think, I mean, the world of philanthropy and the world of receiving grants and grant making, it's a complicated world, and there's a skill, there's an art to it. And so what I really want to encourage is that some of the resources in this room, some of the technical assistance providers, work with you to help you put together the right kinds of proposals that will get a read and get a positive response. Because there are folks in this room who've been writing grants all their lives, and there's somebody right over there, okay, you all need to connect. Because there are people who always get their grants funded, you know, you just need to connect. So that I think is the key. You know what to do for women, we just need to get the resources to be able to do it. We have time for one more question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Dr. Adrian Starks. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Equity Matters, which is the Baltimore Place Matters team.
Yes.
And I recently moved to Birmingham and became a part of the Jefferson County Place Matters team. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the work that you've been doing over the years and always enjoy hearing you speak. So I kind of have an interesting question, kind of piggybacking off of the previous question about funding.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not that you have a poorly written grant. So for instance, in Baltimore, a lot of the work that we try to do in Baltimore is not funded for a number of reasons. One, because possibly different than Birmingham, is that you have this nonprofit industrial complex. So you have people that are gatekeepers that consistently do receive the grants, but it never trickles down to the people that are doing the work on the ground. And at the same time, people that are doing the work on the ground, when they do receive funding, it's a lot of infighting between those that are doing it on the ground. So you don't have an opportunity to build those relationships across sectors of people that are trying to reach the same groups of people. So the CEO wanted me to ask you.
She's the messenger.
How do you connect with entities as Kellogg or other philanthropic organizations that get the message about the importance of doing the work, but making long-term investments within communities? So I know that Alabama may not be a part of the footprint for Kellogg, but Mississippi and some of the neighboring states are. So how do you, if not just use the financial resources, just the experiences and the knowledge that's gained from doing a lot of the work that could be synergized across different cities and states and things of that nature?
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing and that you have done. This will be an appropriate final, I guess, comment. I gotta take it from a couple of angles, right? My life has shown me that there is tremendous power in my own ability to visualize the end and bring it into existence. I am a strong believer in the power of focus and clarity and determination and persistence at the individual level, at the CEO level. I've seen it work. And so the water is muddy, and there are gatekeepers, and there are people that will say no, there are naysayers. But there's nothing more powerful than a determined, persistent leader. There just isn't anything more powerful. And keeping the focus on the desired outcome and not being distracted by all the noise and mud in between is a very important step in the process of achieving one's goal. And it's hard because every day there's something to distract us, right? And if we're not careful, we get caught up in that noise. And it's more stress, and we don't get what we need anymore. That said, there's a movement right now in philanthropy, and it is growing by leaps and bounds. There are over 40 foundations that have stepped up to fund this issue of improving life options for men and boys of color. That's never been done before in the history of philanthropy. Robert Wood Johnson, one of the most, the largest health funder, right? And certainly a very complicated institution, has shifted its focus to creating a culture of health. And within that broader frame is the understanding of all these community issues. So yes, there is a nonprofit industrial complex, there is a prison industrial complex, there is a university industrial complex, there are all these things, right? Voila, democracy. But navigating through those effectively is about both determination and skill, and probably most importantly, it's about relationships. I can't tell you how important relationships are to succeeding in any undertaking, especially in a country that has a legacy of racial hierarchy. In Washington, D.C., to be credible as a black person, when I got to Washington, some ally who was not black had to pick up a phone and say, listen to her. Now, I don't know if that's changed, but it's real. Okay? And so the takeaway from this lesson is that, from this talk today, is that we are so much more effective together than we are apart. Learn how to be allies to one another. Learn how to work together and trust one another. And that's hard. Trust is a hard thing to create. I got 3 ex-husbands, I can tell you. It's a hard thing to build. But it is a requirement. It is an absolute requirement in order to be effective in bringing about community change. And sometimes you get disappointed in the people you trust. But that doesn't mean you walk away. Sometimes. So, your points are all valid. Philanthropy is changing. One of the things you can do is write and publish more articles calling upon philanthropy and the givers of resources to be more accountable to local communities. We try to make that our hallmark at the Kellogg Foundation, but we're kind of unique in that. But if I had to advise or coach any one of you in this room, I would say, don't let the noise and the obstacles and the barriers dominate too much of your consciousness. Focus on the thing that you've been given, the charge that you feel you've been given, and know in your heart that you're going to get the help you need to get it done.